if there's an X in front of it, that means that it's an out of jurisdiction realtor that's listing it. And so the reason that's good to know is because usually out of town realtors won't be as market savvy. They won't be as dialed in. So oftentimes, like I train my wholesalers to look, if you see an MLS number in Southwestern Ontario with an X in front of it, pay more attention to that listing than you would other listings. What is up, YouTube? Matt McKeever here with another episode of Deal Destruction. I've got Myuren with me. Hey, man, how's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So I'm excited for today's video. We're going to be looking at a sixplex in Barrie. So Barrie's a market that I don't know a ton about, but I've been starting to do a little bit more research because it seems to constantly come up. So excited to jump into it. Is Barrie kind of home for you, or what draws you to the Barrie market?
So I live in Vaughan, Ontario. So Barrie is literally like a 45-minute drive up north.
Yep.
A lot of potential in regards to what the real estate market is trending at the moment. So, yeah, in terms of the deal, it's a great property. It's just more of trying to figure out what I can do with it. And the way the deal is structured at the moment, I feel like, I should try my all trying to see if I can get a deal sorted out.
All right, awesome. Well, I'm excited to check this one out. I'm just going to read the description, and then as we go through the photos, feel free to kind of share your perspective. But looks like we're checking out a legal sixplex with great tenants within steps from transit, shopping, schools, and Barrie's beautiful waterfront. Awesome investment property that shows well with over 100,000 of capex in the last 2 years. Newly sided and insulated 5-year warranty, new windows 20-year warranty, new boiler, features lifetime steel roof, newer shingles on garage, coin laundry, up to fire code, and tons of parking, plus garage that allows for lease for long-term storage. Seller extras will consider VTB second position. I already like that. Up to current mortgage maturity date to help qualified buyer to reduce their required down payment. Current financing is CMHC insured and will favor buyer that assumes existing mortgage that matures in 3 years. All right. So looks like a nice purpose-built sixplex. Yeah, looks like a really interesting property, eh?
Yeah.
So yeah, feel free to talk through what kind of attracted you to this one in particular.
So number one, it's located in downtown Barrie on Wellington Street. So what I look for right now in Barrie is more of a lot of developers are building purpose-built rentals. So trying to find the highest and best use. So in regards to where it's located, and I believe down the road it can be used for a larger purpose-built rental. And when I looked at the neighboring properties, there are older single-family homes that on a larger parcel of land that could be demolished and eventually, assembled to a higher and better use development. So I'm thinking more of the long term, and the fact that BTB is involved, I thought it would be the best way, to try my best to see if I can get a deal sorted out.
All right. So everything looks pretty clean, pretty standard. The kitchens aren't brand new, but they look to be in decent shape and everything. Tenants look pretty tidy, or at least they had a cleaner come through.
Yeah.
Okay. So this must have been like an older building that's had some additions on it, eh? Is that how this all shapes up, or do you know?
According to the the listing agent, they did not. It's a legal sixplex. They did not have an extension, according to what he's based on the conversation we had. The seller bought it in 2018, so I haven't been able to pull up the actual like what it looked like 2 years ago. But based on like the utilities and what the information I have, it seems like it was always been a legal sixplex.
Gotcha. Yeah, it looks like the electrical is nice and clean. That looks great there. Got our coin laundry. We've got that backyard with the extra garage, which we might be able to rent out for a little additional income. Some of the things that just make me think that it must be an older, like it was an older property at one time, right? Is we've got the old RAD registers there, right? So, and then we've got, older flooring. We've got, the brick and siding combo where clearly this is older brick just because we can kind of see the details in the brickwork. It'd be rare for someone to do this sort of detailed brickwork on a purpose-built rental these days. And obviously those bricks are a little bit older, but again, none of this actually really matters from the purchase standpoint. It's just more Matt talking. We've got the coal or wood chute or the milk bottle thing there as well. So yeah, it seems like a great property though. The second place VTB is interesting. So I guess before we dive into the numbers here, we've got a sixplex. They're asking a little over 1,700. This almost works out to 300,000 a unit. How does that compare to other things in Barrie?
So from the current analysis I've had so far on the Barrie market, the average purpose built on a per unit basis is around $250,000 to $270,000 per unit.
Okay.
So this is literally at market value, right? However, the way they structured the deal in terms of what the buyer has to do in order to take over the mortgage term, it's kind of limited the selection of buyers that would be able to qualify.
Mm-hmm.
So like you always say, more problems, more profits. So
yeah,
this is not essentially a problem, but it's more of it narrows down the potential group of buyers that would be able to qualify.
Gotcha. All right. So let's jump over to the spreadsheet and just start mapping out some of the basic details here. So purchase price, what were you thinking here? Has this property been listed long? Is there an opportunity to negotiate, or is this you're paying what they're asking?
I can reduce so as long as I reach that 1.7 million over the course of 3-year term, they would be willing to accept a lower, be able to reduce the price to to 1.7, and then over
so when you say as long as they receive 1.7 over the course of 3 years, can we count the interest payments that we pay them? So in essence, just so the audience is kind of following along, in theory, if I was to buy it for 1.4 million but pay $100,000 a year in interest, they would be okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It also defers their taxes as well. Reducing their tax, how much I'm actually purchasing for. But that's what they said. We can increase the interest as long as we reach the end goal.
Okay, and let's talk about some of this assumable mortgage and the VTB, just so we kind of have this going on. So, what's that assumable mortgage look like?
300,000.
The assumable mortgage is 300,000.
Oh, assumable. The VTB is 300,000.
Okay. Yep. And then what's the assumable?
Assumable means that what the buyer has to take over, right?
Yeah, the mortgage that you're assuming.
You're looking at a bit 500,000.
500.
The mortgage, so 800,000.
800. Okay. So in essence, that 500,000 is the difference that you need to come up with, right? If I understand correctly. Okay. So then this is remaining. Okay. So this sounds like a unique deal. I like unique deals. There's sometimes some interesting opportunity to negotiate and get cute here. Now, a couple little things that I will mention though, just as an FYI. We'll go through a couple scenarios here, but some of these scenarios may not actually be favorable for you, depending upon where the real estate market is 3 years from now. So one thing, let's say that, we're probably not going to structure this deal this way, but let's say you bought for $1 million and then agreed to pay $200,000 a year or $230,000 a year in interest payments. When you went to refinance, some appraisers might look negatively on that, right? So one thing that's just important, and just for yourself as well as anyone that's home listening to this, understand that a lot of brand new real estate investors, they think that appraisers are some sort of omnipresent gods that really understand where a real estate market is. They're actually just humans and they're fallible like all of us. And so an appraisal is actually someone's opinion. And so while in theory, what we paid for a property shouldn't really impact a professional's opinion, we often find in reality it can. So again, some of the more extreme creative options that might be available to us may end up not actually being favorable from an overall looking at the entire chessboard position. So we can kind of explore that together in a little bit, but just kind of want to leave that caveat for anyone that's maybe looking at similar deals or looking at trying to get creative on the deals. So okay, I guess we're actually looking at maybe closer to 600,000 for our remaining total, but that's fine. So I guess one, I can get carried away in trying to structure and get cute with these deals. Before we do that, I'm going to just make an assumption here that buying this property fits within your long-term goals and plans as an investor. So, what does it kind of look like from a monthly cash flow perspective? Like, what are we getting in rent for this sixplex?
So right now, with the current structure that they have so far, the current rent, the current cash flow, just give me a sec. We are looking at 1,072 a month. But
For
that
cash
also,
flow.
yes, but that also includes paying off a portion of it to the VTB. So the VTB is for
So is this your pro forma or their pro forma?
their pro forma.
Okay, so just one thing to be really careful here. I don't know your extent or experience with real estate investing, but unfortunately, most sellers and most sellers' realtors, we find them, if not to be misleading, they're at least very forgettable when it comes to expenses and stuff. So we want to be really careful about pro formas from sellers. Oftentimes, what we'll find with pro formas from sellers is they're going to take fair market rents, even when the units are currently rented for less than what fair market rents are. As well, we'll often find with pro formas from sellers that they'll ignore things like property management. They'll often ignore bad debt and vacancy, as well as ignoring repairs and maintenance. And so for myself, the way I like to run my numbers is that I often take 10% of gross rents for property management and lawn and snow maintenance. Then I take 5% for bad debt and vacancy, and then 5% for repairs and maintenance, which actually means 20% of my gross rents. I usually allocate towards those expenses. We're normally on a seller's pro forma. They actually won't have any expenses allocated to that. Were you able to dive into their pro forma? Does their pro forma seem reasonable? Does it seem like it's including all expenses?
From a high level, yeah, but like you said, I did not. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to actually break it down on my own performance sheet and actually take into consideration if they did it, because even if their vacancy rate is at 1.7%, but as an appraiser, they usually don't go less than 2%. Because anything less than 2% is kind of 2%.
Yeah. And again, each company is different, but like it's oftentimes here that the appraisers are going to go with an even higher rate than 2% on a small building like this, just because it doesn't take long for 2% per annum to kind of come up in regards to your rents. All it takes is one unit being vacant for a month, right, on a small multifamily.
Right.
But okay, that's good to know. So I guess one thing that is a little bit difficult with this is just like, having a cash flow number rather than all the detailed line item expenses. But I also know that we were chatting before we started the video. You do have a work assignment that's due tomorrow. So I won't go super deep into the nitty gritty on the analysis of the cash flow numbers. I'll just assume that this is ballpark what we're working with. And then we'll work through this together and determine what actually makes the most sense. So one thing that's interesting about this is the fact that the seller wants 1.7 million, but they don't really care how that 1.7 million gets to them, right? So a few things that we should be aware of, particularly as Canadian real estate investors, right? We don't have a 1031 exchange, which is something that Americans have that can really incentivize sellers to want to sell rental properties as long as they're buying an upgrade building, like buying a bigger building. However, we do have capital gains deferral. And so the capital gains deferral can come via vendor take back mortgage. And what that often looks like, right, is we can defer the capital gains or smooth the capital gains over up to a 5-year period, depending upon the details of that vendor take back mortgage. So that oftentimes can reduce some of the tax burden for the seller, just depending upon their personal exact situation or their corporate situation as the property owner. The other factor to take into consideration, though, is capital gains is going to be taxed more favorably than interest income. So sometimes we find that sellers would actually rather us pay more for a property and essentially have no interest payments rather than paying less for a property and having really big interest payments. Because on like once everything shakes out in the end, they're usually actually going to be better served and keep more of their money by selling the property for a higher amount rather than selling it for a lower amount with a high interest rate.
Okay.
So and it sounds like you've already got this sense from the seller, but it sounds like the sellers are concerned about their tax burden and they want to kind of reduce the overall tax impact from this transaction. Another thing that's obvious to me, the fact that they want you to assume the mortgage, either the mortgage has large breaking fees and they don't want to incur that, or sometimes what we found is that sellers, like some sellers are just weird again because they're humans and we're all weird in our own way, but some sellers are weird and they get hung up on random things like, what, a $5,000 breaking fee over my dead body, and they'll literally throw away a $2 million transaction over something that I would consider a rounding error, but they decide to make a moral crusade out of it. So one thing I would encourage you just to get to the bottom of is really understanding what that assumable mortgage looks like, because they might say like, oh, it's got these ridiculous breaking fees. And then you might look into it and actually find out that it's only like $5, $10, $20,000, which in the big scheme of things on a 1.7 million purchase may not really matter to you, but maybe really matters to them. And we might be able to get the property under more favorable terms or situations by simply being like, hey, instead of offering you 1.7, what if I offer you 1.74 or 1.76, and now you can pay for the break-in fees and stuff? So just kind of general food for thought on that. And I'd either have my realtor or their realtor explore it with them and just try and get to the bottom of that. But with all that being said, if this was a property I was looking at buying, I would probably focus on trying to get a larger VTB here and probably offer a larger purchase price, but then essentially have, in a perfect world, what I'd want to do on a property like this, I'm assuming that the units are currently under rented. So I'm going to assume that if you could get some tenant turnover, you could increase the gross rents on the building and increase your cash flow, because that's usually the case unless the property was just rented out all the units this year. So what I would consider or be looking at here is, what if I bought it for like 1.8 million, but instead, well, I think I lost a zero, but what if I bought it for 1.8 million? I'll still assume your 800,000 and 800,000 in assumable mortgage. So then that means I've got essentially $1 million left here to make up. But what if instead you could give me, and again, I don't know what your capital is, but usually most people that come on my show, they're always trying to figure out ways to put as little as money possible into these deals. And so sometimes by offering a larger purchase price, we can incentivize the seller to listen to the other aspects that we're concerned with. You know, is there a version where I could actually get $600,000 mortgage here, but have this be like a 0% interest only? And so what is really attractive about that is it really lets me smooth my cash flow over the next 3 years. So if I don't have to pay anything on that VTB until a balloon payment at the end, essentially what that allows me to do is I can go in, fix up units, do cash for keys, buy out tenants, and I'll probably cash flow or at least break even if right now the property is under rented, because I'm not having to really service the 600,000 in debt. So this is something we regularly do. Now, usually you'll get some pushback from sellers and they may not like this. So often what we'll do then is we'll try and create a short period of time where we're 0% interest only. And then maybe we'll have interest come into effect after year one. And then we'll try and do a balloon payment at the end of year two. So like essentially, again, the first 2 years, I'm really paying nothing out of pocket until the end of year two. But what it allows me to do is really get some runway. So I can get in there, buy some leases, right? Like get some tenants to move out, fix up the units, get up to the highest, best rents, which is going to create more robust cash flow for me. So that when that balloon payment comes or the monthly payments come after my deferral period or my 0% interest period, then I can take on that obligation with less stress or less burden.
Interesting. I've actually never thought about increasing. I've always thought about reducing it and paying back on a refi. at a
And
higher
so
price.
again, this is just something where you just need to really know what you want as an investor. But if I'm just looking at the ballpark here, if you have to put 600,000 into this deal and you're only looking, and this is assuming that the seller is correct in their $1,000 cash flow, which again, you need to really do some deep due diligence on that before you trust them on it. But
Right.
if we assume that they're correct here, from a percentage standpoint, you're looking at a 2% cash on cash return, right? Because I essentially need to put 600,000 into this deal and I'm going to get $12,000 a year in cash flow if I'm roughly $1,000 a month. And so if we instead flip this and put this over here, well, immediately my cash on cash got higher because of this. But also in theory, my cash flow should be higher because we've structured in such a way where I'm no longer paying interest on the VTB. Now, I don't know off the top what that is, but let's say it worked out to $200 or $400 or whatever. Again, I'm getting a better cash on cash return over a short period of time. Now, I still need to have a plan for when this 3 years comes up. So I'm going to want to have a very detailed roadmap on how I'm going to be able to refinance it and be able to pay off the vendor take back, pay off the assumable. And I don't know, part of the assumption here is, what do you think units are going to be worth in Barrie 3 years from now? It's kind of tough right now. We're in a very aggressive bull market where prices just keep hitting new records. Can
Right.
we do that for the next 3 years? It's definitely possible, but I would want to make sure that I've got a very clear roadmap that if 3 years from now, let's say this property ends up being worth just roughly what you bought it for, or maybe it's worth 2 million now instead of 1.7 or 1.8. I just want to make sure that I was still in a very clear path to making sure that I could control that asset after the refinance. So sometimes when we get into these creative deals, it can be easy to get a deal that works in the short term, but maybe, trips you up when it comes time to refinance it. So that's
So
one other thing to consider.
do you think doing an appraisal, like a hypothetical market value, as stabilized um, upon the end of the term, like you do an appraisal and, as an appraiser, they might determine what the price per unit and the cap rate would be estimated at, in every 3 year. Do you think that would give me a better idea in terms of how to project the market value of the property?
If, like, in theory, yes. In practice, I don't think it's going to give you a lot of valuable information just because, like we kind of touched upon earlier, appraisers really are fallible. So I don't think that you're going to find them being, yeah, I guess just based upon my historical experience and anecdotal experience, I don't place a lot of faith in long-term projections from those sort of individuals. So if you literally knew nothing about the market and you were like, I need something to start with, I think that'd be a great starting point. But I wouldn't use that as the only piece of homework I did in regards to getting comfort around this deal. Other points could be talking to a handful of realtors, talking to a handful of investors that specialize in these sort of asset classes as well. And for me, I'd much rather get 3 or 5 realtor opinions and 3 or 5 investor opinions and then kind of blend them all together or aggregate them and get an average from it, versus say just one appraiser's opinion. But again, that's not a terrible starting point, but I think it's only the starting point rather than the end all be all.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Yeah. So I think, next steps for me on a deal like this is really just gathering more information, getting the in-depth pro forma numbers, spending some time and really making sure I'm comfortable with those numbers. If you don't have a lot of other data sets to compare against, again, I'd encourage you connect with some other fellow investors in the Barrie market and find out, what do you pay for insurance? What do you pay for property taxes? What does property management cost? What sort of vacancy rates do you put in your numbers and things like that? And
Right.
for, whether it's for yourself or anyone watching this video, if you guys don't know, Cashflow Tribe is my education company. If you go to cashflowtribe.com, we've actually got over 1,500 Canadian investors now that are part of the community. So we've got investors across Canada. I know we've got a bunch in the Barrie, Aurelia area. So if you're looking to connect with some like-minded individuals, jumping into those forums and even just like posting some, like, hey, where do you guys think, what rent multiplier do you think we'll be using 3 years from now in Barrie? Or what do you think the value of a unit will be 6 years from or 3 years from now in Barrie? Again, I wouldn't take any individual's word as gospel, but if you get enough data points, it can really help you gain some understanding, at least, of where the other actors are in the current market.
Okay, offer. Thank you.
Awesome, man. Well, if people want to follow along with you on your real estate investing journey, can they? And if so, what are the best platforms to do so on?
Yeah, so I actually started an Instagram page, Myuren C, Myurenc. Currently I have 3 properties and 9 units in 12 months. I just started learning
Awesome.
a lot. Been following Matt McKeever and a lot of the other major real estate investors in Southwestern Ontario, so gathering data and just learning how to grow. So I do appreciate your time, Matt, and hopefully I can continue to grow.
Awesome, man. Well, best of luck. Keep us in the loop if you end up going down the negotiation angle. If you end up buying this property, I'd love to check in, a month or 6 months from now. So feel free to sign up for a future deal destruction and let us know how this went.
Yeah, we'll do. All right.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank you.
man.